Today I'm going to speak with you about runway incursion avoidance. A runway incursion is any occurrence at an aerodrome involving the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle, person on the protected area of the surface designated for the landing and takeoff of an aircraft. A surface incident is an unauthorized, unapproved movement within the designated movement area, excluding the runway incursions, or an occurrence in that same area associated with the operation of an aircraft that affects or could affect the safety of flight. There are four categories of runway incursions, increasing in severity as we go from D to A. And basically a D is something where an incorrect presence of a vehicle or aircraft, so we get a lot of those out at 52 Foxtrot where people don't understand they can't drive a car across the runway, but there's no immediate safety consequences. Category C is going to be characterized by that same thing, but maybe somebody's on final and a car is driving down the runway. Category B is where you only have a split amount of time to avoid a collision, and then category A is within milliseconds, a near miss. And then an accident is an incursion that results in a collision. Taxiing is becoming more difficult as airports expand in size, and as the aviation continues to become more popular. This has had a downturn in the last several months, however, that'll probably come back around again, and we need to be more cognizant of airport runway incursions moving forward. So while you are about to taxi, it's important to maintain a sterile cockpit. Sterile cockpit means no unnecessary communication during taxi, takeoff, and landings, and in the air below 10,000 feet except for when in cruise. So don't need to be telling funny stories when you're taxiing around. It's also very important to plan, review, and brief everything prior to taxiing. I train out of Addison, and it's a relatively simple airport. However, we had individuals coming on crew that were confused about the airport and thought they needed to get on right here at Gulf, and I believe they got a runway incursion. So I went ahead and drew this out, and I advise all my students to do that as well. Go ahead and take your ForeFlight out and draw a line when you're listening to the taxi clearance. And then brief that. Confirm with your co-pilot. Review it. Hotspots are areas of a history of confusion or near misses, and these also need to be identified prior to taxiing. And then when you're taxiing near other aircraft, you need to make sure that you're maintaining the appropriate distance and you're cognizant of which way they're turning. In Addison, a lot of times the buildup of aircraft can go all the way back to hotel, right? So people end up turning and facing the best they can into the wind and doing the run-ups right there on the taxiway. So if you're coming out of a different FBO, you might need to be careful about that downwash or the prop wash for that. As I said before, airport hotspots is defined as a location on an airport moving area with a history of potential risk of collision or runway incursion, and where heightened attention by pilots and drivers is necessary. And when you look at the actual taxi diagram, it's going to be laid out. This is hotspot 1, hotspot 2, and it's going to have a circle around it. I believe on ForeFlight it's going to have a red circle around it. Steering, maneuvering, and maintaining taxiway runway position is critical. There are taxiway lines for a reason. Ensure that your center wheel is maintaining that center line at all times. And low visibility, use everything available and make sure you're doubly aware of your taxi instructions. One of the highest losses of life, I think the highest loss of life, was an accident where two planes started, an airplane, a 747, started their takeoff roll and didn't understand that there was another 747 on the other end of the runway in very low visibility conditions just like this. And also make sure that you use all lights available, excluding strobe lights, because they might blind you. Another thing, before your flights, before you start your taxi, consult the airport facility directory. And this is kind of an old school one. 4Flight now breaks it up to you into a little bit easier, recognizable terms. But this is what the old school, or what the mainstay, not old school, but the airport facility directory is going to look like. Now on this you can identify all of the runway widths and lengths. So this runway at Addison is 7,203 feet long and 100 feet wide. You can identify what type of lights it has. You can identify the NOTAMs. You can identify the tower hours. For instance, Addison turns into Gulf airspace and the control tower is not in operation after 11 p.m. or before 7 a.m. So these are some things to keep in mind. It's also important to know where to find the METAR, the ATIS, the AWOS, all that information prior to taxiing, prior to coming into the airport, and you can find that right here. So this is a really good resource. And then just talking about the different types of NOTAMs, a NOTAM D Delta is going to tell you, about taxiway closures, runway closures. Very, very important to go ahead and look over all the NOTAMs prior to taxiing. And the way that I make sure that I have all the NOTAMs is to always get a flight briefing, call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and make sure that him and I or her and I discuss all of the NOTAMs prior to starting my flight. Here's a couple of runway boundary signs. Taxiway holding short signs. And on this side, you can tell, just imagine on this side you need a clearance to cross, and on this side you need to get off the runway as soon as possible. And then this right here is going to be an ILS holding scenario. Big part of runway incursions, or a lot of runway incursions rather, happen through not getting cleared to pass this. So make sure that you stay well far away from that. And my first flight instructor actually told me he was pretty paranoid about it. He's like, any one time I want to be able to take my camera outside of the window and take a picture of that, just in case there's any arguments on where I was in accordance with the taxi line, or the hold short line rather. Landing and rollouts. This is Graham, Texas. I go here, very cheap gas often. When you're rolling out here, you have to brief this before you land. Okay, so you're going to cross an intersecting runway, and a lot of times the weather is better for 1-8, but I choose the longer runway. So A, you got to make sure that there's no traffic coming in, and B, you got to decide, are you going to roll out right here, or are you going to roll out all the way at the end? If you land on 1-8, are you going to roll all the way to the end and taxi back? These are thoughts. This is thought process type of stuff that you need to think about before you land, or you might get yourself in a pretty uncomfortable scenario. And also, of course, when you do roll out, if you plan beforehand, you'll know whether you need. You'll be at the appropriate speed. You won't side load the gear real hard and taxi at high speeds. Parallel runways. Make sure you over-communicate with air traffic control in the tower. Just because you're cleared to enter 1-8 left right here doesn't mean you're clear to enter 18 right. And just because you're exiting 18 right, if you roll all the way down, stop right here and make sure you have clearance to cross 18 left. After landing, ensure that the entire aircraft is around the respective landing hold short line. Like I said earlier, this side you need a clearance, the solid bar side, and the broken bar side you can actually cross that. I was always taught to do my after landing checklist after I've crossed that, but make sure that your tail is completely across this bar before proceeding. When speaking with control towers, make sure that you use standard ATC phraseology. Keep it simple. State who you are, where you are, and what you want, and then read back all the clearances as they were read to you. Now, I was talking about Graham earlier, and earlier this year the weather was very calm. So be concerned about that, because at uncontrolled fields, they're called uncontrolled for a reason. And somebody might be taking off the runway that you're trying to land on, the opposite way of the runway that you're trying to land on. So make sure that you have situational awareness. Departing aircraft, there's a lot of old Cubs there, and aircrafts built before a certain date are not required to have radios on. So make sure you do the standard overpass and actually use your eyes to verify that there's nobody on the runway. Over communicate. From engine start taxi until 10 miles to or from the airport, make sure that you're over communicating your position, and then be familiar with the local traffic pattern, direction, and the altitudes. Exterior lighting and night operations. You want to be, at night, you want to be as conspicuous as possible. And on your walk around, you need to take extra care to make sure that there's nobody around and the aircraft has no debris around it either. Make sure that you turn on the rotating beacon prior to starting the engine, and prior to commencing taxi, turn on nav position and anti-collision lights. Crossing the runway, turn on all the lights. At night, when cleared to land, line up and wait. Line up 3 feet off the center line to enable a landing aircraft to differentiate you from the runway lights. Takeoff. Landing lights should be turned on when taking runway, and at night, taxi slower and read the taxi signs. Additionally, strobe should be turned off in the run-up area. It's just kind of an etiquette thing to ensure that we don't negatively impact the other pilot's night vision. Thank you for your attention.